Good afternoon. I want now to have the lesson for today. And before we go in front, oh, sorry about the mask. Before we go any further, I want to also introduce you again, as we always do in the beginning of the lessons. These lessons are proudly sponsored by VT Africa Holdings in conjunction with their subsidiaries, which are Fibertech, and they are also sponsored by the Department of Basic Education. Here are our login details. When you are engaging in our assessments, you always log into your hellosmart.com and you sign up as a guest. Your ID is the one written on the board here, 59751. We are going to be looking at our lesson, which is a continuation of the lesson that we had yesterday. And we are looking at the changing land, changing patterns in the urban areas of South Africa. So let's just go to a slide that we looked at yesterday, and then we are going to go to other slides that we didn't look at yesterday. So the first one here is inversion and succession. And we explained yesterday that when you land use is replaced by another different form of land use, that form of change is called inversion or succession. Inversion and succession is when one inappropriate land use is replaced by another more appropriate land use, such as from residential to commercial. A new activity invades and takes over an inappropriate land use area and makes it successful once more. For instance, a place will be used as a residential area, and the place is very close to the CBD. And that is actually a place that is potential for business. But you will find that instead of being used for commercial purposes, the place is being used for residential purposes. So if that area is and a new use like a commercial use or an industrial use is put in place, that is what we call invasion or succession. Then we also looked at gated communities. These are residential areas that are created for secure housing. I think we know them as security compounds. Sometimes that's what the security complexes, which are given to people and they've got more security. So they are usually fenced, they are walled, and they've got gates that are always manned by security. So residential areas are created for secure housing estates with restricted access to residents and visit. The areas are fenced off and have controlled access. Gated communities are created to provide residents with security and safety. Then this is one slide that we had not visited yesterday, and we want to look at what we call the edge city. Right. These edge cities are actually like commercial centers that are created outside of the CBD, in an effort to decentralize the functions of the CBD. So decentralization leads to the development of areas beyond inner to include upmarket commercial centers such as shopping centers, entertainment, office and business parks, retail space, and gated communities. Right, counter-urbanization. Cities, we are actually saying people are now not preferring to stay in the urban areas, mostly because of the congestion in the city, the noise pollution, even the air pollution, the crime, So people will prefer to actually move back into rural to escape all these issues that I mentioned here, to and enjoy the quiet and open areas, the peace, space, and privacy of the rural areas. Densification, we want to look at what we call urban sprawl, which makes it difficult to manage large cities. And what do we mean by urban sprawl? It is the spreading out of urban developments to underdeveloped land near a city. I think you may be aware that there are many places that are being built that are maybe where there are residential areas of cities that are encroaching into the farming community or the farming areas that have been around large cities like a vital example. We may talk of places like the extension of Protea Glen in Soweto, which is actually going into former farming areas. And so that's what we call the urban sprawl. It makes it difficult to manage, like see the distances between where people live and work increase. So as you can see people will be coming from as far as that Protea Glen that I'm mentioning, and some of them will be working in Joburg, and now Joburg City CBD is now far from there. But that means they will have to find efficient transport to go there, and this becomes very difficult for cities to manage that. The distances between where people live and work increase, and poor public transport infrastructure can't provide sufficient services to these large spread out areas. Then let's look at specification, which is, we've got a definition here: increased use of horizontal and vertical space within existing areas to accompany increasing population thresholds. So it is a way of encouraging people to live close together. And this has led to the development of townhouses and clusters and subdivision of larger property. I think we all know about the flats that are being built, which actually encourages people to live closer together. But this, as you can see here, I think we all know that we're in the era of COVID. And the concept of densifying residential areas, or this densification, is going to prove to be very problematic because now people have to live far from each other. People need to observe what we call social distancing. So this is actually another challenge that urban management is going to be to urban management and also town planners are going to encounter. The board is okay. Let's hope it's not going to switch off. Now we are going to look at what we call new urbanism, the development of urban areas in a way that promotes a high standard of living to people living close to the city center. A variety of land uses and residents are mixed together. So it is about promoting higher standard of living of people who are close to the city center. And a variety of land uses and residents are mixed together in one area. And different cultures, ages, races, income groups live close together. New urbanism discourages urban sprawl with buildings, shops, houses, and services grouped close together, and promotes environment-friendly technology and green forms of living. Right. We are going to look at these questions when we are done with our lesson for today. So we need to leave these questions. Let's move to another lesson for today. Let's just bring this down. And let's come back. Let's wait. Right. What we are going to be looking at today is a new topic is urban settlement issue. We know that we have been mentioning some issues as we were going through the lessons of the patterns and urban infrastructure. So we are now going to basically zero into the urban settlement issues. Before we move to those, we are going to look at our vocabulary. So we are going to have these words that we are going to encounter, and we need to know their meaning. They are not words per se, they are terms. Let's look at centrifugal forces. What do you mean by centrifugal forces? These are forces that cause depopulation of the CBD, resulting in the decline of inner city centers, which show degeneration and urban blight or decay. Then we have other definitions that are given here that we're going to see also there. Let's go back to our page. All right, let's go back to the definitions. Something didn't go well here, right? Let's come back here. Then when we look at degeneration, we are looking at decline or deterioration. Then when we look at urban decay, we're looking at, it's just another word for urban blight, which means a previously functioning city falls into disrepair and degeneration. Social justice, this is the recognition that all people deserve to expect standards, high standards of living. Then we defined densification. Then let's look at what is a developing country. A developing country is a less industrialized country with lower income levels, still growing or advancing economically and socially. And this is where African countries, as well as most Asian countries and South American countries fall under. And the developed countries, when we say developed countries, we're talking of those highly industrialized countries like the United States of America. We are talking of the countries like mostly the countries in the European Union. It is still a bit unsure, and people are still unsure, the geographers, about where to classify countries like China, because they've come a long way. It is now the second biggest economy in the world, but it is by and large been described as a developing country. Then let's look at other words, but we are going to leave these words because we can't go on to, then we need RDP house. I can't we don't have to define that. We all know what are RDP. Our urban sprawl, we did define it. Rapid urbanization, infrastructure. We defined this yesterday. Traffic congestion. No, I think we are well aware or have a idea about the definitions of many of those terms. So we just need to move on, right? The concepts that we are going to be, and as I always emphasize, it is very important in geography to understand that, because if you don't know the concepts, you might find it very difficult to answer the questions in the examination, because in the examination you will be really show your confidence in defining those concepts and in applying the geographical jargon or the terminology that you need to apply when you are answering the questions. So these are the contents or the concepts that we're going to be dealing with. We are going to deal with recent urbanization patterns in South Africa, urban issues related to urbanization. So we are going to have right recent urbanization in South Africa, urban issues related to rapid urbanization, the growth of informal settlements associated issues, as well as managing urban challenges in South Africa. Then we are just going to have a formative assessment, but unfortunately it's not going to be an online one. We are going to actually go back to the other questions that I showed you, and we deal with some of those questions and come to some of the questions that are related to settlement issues. Right. What are the recent urban patterns in South Africa? As we mentioned earlier on, that was yesterday. Urban patterns are actually changing throughout. You find that the old urban patterns that were designed by urban planners and geographers in the 19th century are being replaced by the newer ones that more human-centric, that are more into the human rights issues. They are also raising up the people's standards of living. So you find that South Africa also is changing from the urban patterns that were actually done, especially during colonization and apartheid. So had its own, as we mentioned yesterday, we saw the model for South Africa, where you found that people were living apart from each other according to their races and also according to their social class. The middle class white people, the low class white people, and the high class white people living separately, as well as the black African people living separate from the Indian and colored people, and so forth. So let's look at this. How are the patterns changing in South Africa? Due to rapid rural urban migration, as well as global, South Africa is experiencing rapid urbanization. That's another change that is actually both beneficial and also problematic to the South African cities. So you find that there is rural urban migration as my other parts of the world, of people coming to South Africa, especially ever since the advent of democracy. You find that many people are finding South Africa to be more attractive and a safe country to invest and to live in. Currently, about 62% of people in South Africa live in urban areas, and urbanization to increase. So as you can see, we've got 62% of people in South Africa living in urban areas. And why are they moving to the urban areas? It's because they are no longer being obliged or forced by law to stay in the Bantustans or in the homelands, as they were later called. So during apartheid, you find that of Kar, that is, let me just call them Black Africans, were forced to live in the Bantustans in their homelands like Transkei, Ciskei, Zulu, and they were not allowed by law to migrate to cities, and they were offered employment. So there was the issue of passes, and that's all that's historical, and it actually hindered people from coming and staying in the cities. But ever since this law was removed around 1986, you find out many people actually moved to their cities and stayed in the cities. So resulting in 62% of South African people living in the urban area, and only 50, what is that? Only 8% living in the rural areas. The discovery of diamonds in 1867 and gold in 1870, urbanization in South Africa. So this discovery, you find that when the diamonds were discovered in Kimberley, it attracted a lot of people from over. We find people like John Rhodes and others migrating South Africa and starting to do their adventures. See the discoveries of the TBS consolidated, and we see the expansion of those areas to become cities. And that was the city of Kimberley. It was established because of the diamonds that were discovered there in 1867. Then when diamond gold went on to be discovered in the Johannesburg area, you find that people also scrambled for the resources in that area, and people established settled businesses were also established to cater for the people who were mining, people who were giving other forms of services to the area, or to the settlers that had settled there around the mining compounds or mining camps, and that resulted Johannesburg becoming a town, eventually becoming a city, eventually becoming a conurbation that it is today. For example, in 1880, okay, I think there was just a mix-up here of the dates. 1886, Johannesburg started out as a mining camp on a farm where gold was found. So this is what I was that this actually Johannesburg started as just a mining camp. So you can see the metamorphosis now of the city of Johannesburg, how it started and where it is now. So in 1886, you see the beginning of Johannesburg, and becoming a town and eventually becoming a city. Now, during apartheid era, urbanization was limited because the migrant labor system, which forced Black people to settle in so-called reserves, which later became known as homelands. I have already covered on this one, which later became called home. So these are the Bantustans that I was talking about, that people were not allowed to just move freely because of the migrant labor system. You would only move around in the cities if you have got a pass and you are employed at a certain place. So that made it very difficult for Black people to simply migrate to the cities. Right, let's look at this recent urbanization patterns in South Africa. Urban settlement in 1986, before 1986 and after 1986. Urban settlements in before 1986, they developed separately between races. That's very important. They developed separately between races. So it means it was a criminal offense to find a white person staying in Soweto. And it will also be criminal for a black person to be living in, for, let's say, there were white towns and black, Asian or colored